This video is going to be on using a tender operation to support an attack engine in an area with no hydrants. For demonstration purposes, we have an engine that's going to be flowing about 500 gallons a minute and just pumping out into the woods. After dropping the tail, the attack engine leaves either a gated Y or a triamese at the end of the supply line so that incoming tenders can pump into it. The bottom line goal of tender operations is to keep water flowing up the line. The way we do that is we try to set up a one-way flow through the area where we're supplying water. Ideally, the first tender stops short of the tail and makes connections for both ports on the triamese so that multiple tenders can pump into the line. In this video, though, we're only going to hook up one of the lines from the tender to the attack line. The second line will be used later for later tenders. The key to this system is to always have water being pumped up the supply line to the attack engine. To do that, we set up the direct pumping by tenders going back and forth, pumping the main line as the way to keep that line flowing. And once we have tenders backed up, we'll set up the porta-tank operation. But we'll probably still have a tender sitting there on the direct pumping in case something goes wrong with the porta-tank operation, so the attack engine does not lose water coming up its supply line. Once we have multiple tenders pumping into the supply line through direct pumping, we move on to the second part of the operation, which is porta-tanks. Ideally, the porta-tank operation takes place on the downstream side of the apparatus flow. So you have tenders on the upside stream and an engine setting up porta-tanks on the downstream side. Only go to porta-tank operations when you have enough tenders set up so that they can continue pumping the line and you have extra tenders waiting to come in. The first tender that's leaving after pumping the supply line will drop their porta-tank, both hard suction line, the jet siphon strainer, and any other appliances that they might need. The crew doesn't set up the porta-tank, they just drop off the components and then they go back to the fill site to refill their tender. The engine crew managing the porta-tank operation sets up the porta-tank as close to their engine as they can, but they try to keep the porta-tank out of the road so tenders can sneak by. You can either set it up on the opposite side pump panel or set it up on the near side pump panel if the AO wants to keep a closer eye on it. Usually takes 2 sections, sometimes it can take 3. You attach the jet siphon to the hard suction and a 1 section of 50-foot 1 3/4 line. This doesn't work very well if you use wildland hose, so try to just use 1 3/4 line. The purpose of this first attachment to the jet siphon strainer that's going into the attack engine is if you need help maintaining a draft or getting a draft going. The first available tender comes in and fills up the porta-tank for the crew that's going to be drafting out of the porta-tank. The porta-tank crew then hooks up their discharge into the supply line that's already being fed by several tenders to the attack engine. The two smaller lines are being pumped directly by tenders. The larger line is coming from the engine doing porta-tank operations. The second tender that has pumped the line and is now out of water drops off their porta-tank, their hard suction, their jet siphon. So we have another porta-tank. We're going to be doing a dual porta-tank operation. The purpose of the dual porta-tank operation is that the drafting engine just drafts out of the first porta-tank that's right next to it. All following tenders drop their water into the second tank, and we're going to be lifting the water from the second tank into the tank that is being used for drafting. So we have a dump tank and we have a drafting tank. The AO on the drafting engine draws a prime, and if he needs to, he or she can use the jet siphon to speed up the drafting operation to get a prime. The system works well as long as you don't run out of water in the drafting porta tank, the first one that's right next to the engine. If you've had time to refill your booster tank on your engine, you can rely on that water, but if you run out of water on both sides, you got to start all over with the drafting operation. So now the pumping engine has now attached a second 50-foot section of 1 3/4 line to the second jet siphon strainer that is solely going to be lifting water from the dump tank that's being filled into the drafting tank. It is not hooked to anything else. It's just being used to lift. In tests, we were able to generate flows of 400 and 500 gallons a minute running our jet siphon line at about 100 to 125 psi. So right now, the drafting tank is being fed by the dump tank as long as they keep pumping the 1 3/4 line that is running the jet siphon.